Yo, what's up, fam-lam? Racism's for losers. I mean that seriously, but I also mean it objectively. And I don't mean it to be offensive. I don't mean it to be holier than thou, because I'm going to talk about this in terms of class conflicts, and I want people to understand that I'm not in this position where I can look down on the losers of society and say I'm in a better position. I know people think I'm like Jesus. People think I'm like some genius and I have all this money because, you must have money to travel the country. Rather than the fact that I've just made certain sacrifices that other people are not willing to make. Let's see. We're still recording. So anyway, racism is for losers in the sense that when someone says something like, well, I just want to live around people like myself, what they're really saying is that below a certain income level, I'm realizing that there are a lot of socio-economic costs associated with being in the middle class, and that the middle class is being hollowed out, and that the future of the middle class is being funneled further and further down this third world sinkhole. And so they associate that in their mind. They're like, okay, so if we become more like Mexico, then that's because of these Mexicans. And if we just, this racial issue, if we just solve that, then we could fix that problem. Which is not true in my opinion, but that's their association. And while it's causally incorrect, I mean, it's relationally correlated, and I understand why people create that association. But the problem is that, if you have a six-figure salary, although increasingly that's not even enough, but, if you're rich in this country, Meghan Markle grew up in this, 99% white town in California, and that's why she's so racially resentful, is because she was the only black girl. She's like a quarter black, but, for her that was very upsetting because she felt like she was surrounded by racism, and this is in California, which is a majority state. So if that can happen in California, it can happen anywhere in the country. You just have to have money. So when someone says, I care about race, really what they're saying in that sense, like, of course, everybody cares about race these days, except for the Trump supporters, right? They don't see race, but, everybody cares about race. But when somebody says, I'm based and red-pilled, I think you're a loser. That's what I think. And I don't think it in a sense that I'm better off or I'm above those people. In a certain sense, I think they have a lot of self-deception inside of them. And I'm glad not to be in that position. But socioeconomically, I'm not so different from them. I'm going to be subject to a lot of the same ideological pressures that they're going to be facing. Like, I'm not in the yacht looking down on them in the lifeboat and like, you're poor and I'm rich. That's not what I'm doing. But when I'm just trying to objectively explain what's going on, and this is what I hear, and this is what other people hear when someone says, I'm based and red-pilled. What everybody else hears is that, except for the normal person or the Trump supporter who doesn't even understand what that means, the baby boomer. But for people who understand those signals, and whether, it's support for Russia or whether it's being against democracy or being part of some, obscure Christian sect, all of this is a signal to say, I'm poor. The system isn't working for me. I can't figure out how to make the system work for me. I feel hopeless. And so I'm just going to advocate for something completely new, completely revolutionary, because I don't have a place in America anymore. And basically I'm losing everything. And I see that my future is worse off than, the past was for my parents and grandparents. So that's the signal. And again, I understand it, and I sympathize with the plight of people who are facing despair. And I think there's a better solution than being a reactionary, certainly. But I understand why people become reactionaries. And if liberals actually wanted to change minds and win hearts and, encourage love over hate and that sort of thing, then they would have sympathy with these people and ask, like, why are these people espousing these beliefs? It's for very tangible reasons, like their lives are worse, and they associate that with liberal democracy, and so therefore they spitefully attack the principles of liberal democracy and diversity and everything that comes along with it, because they identify it with a system that doesn't work for them. It's very self-interested. It's very logical. It's not actually motivated by hate of black people primarily, although I think some of them do slip into that to one extent or another. A lot of them have very twisted beliefs about black on white crime vis-a-vis, cancer and other maladies. But to kind of introduce that stuff and let that sink in, let you chew that over, pause the video and think about how this applies to people you may know. But I want to move on from that to say that I have been resentful as I've been, I think, growing and maturing and trying to shift over the years and be authentic and be real and not be afraid to talk to people, not be afraid of the consequences of speaking the truth. I've wanted to do that, and I see the appeal of people who are like, well, the most controversial thing is race, and therefore I'm gonna break all these taboos, and by that it's a signal that I have this masculine the masculine urge to speak the truth without regard to the consequences. There's something admirable about it, even if it's foolish. Like, there is something admirable about that, and there's something attractive about that, and there's something I've always wanted to embody in that. I've had moments in my life where I've said, no matter the consequences, I should be honest. So I've tried to, it's not even that I necessarily try, it's just that I do have a deep-seated need to live that life. And even though I become cynical or I see certain things as impractical, I still do feel compelled again and again, drawn back to that. I'm subject to all the same pressures. I think as human beings, you reach a certain level of sensitivity, and we all have the same sort of struggles, just in different flavors and varieties, but we feel those, we identify those, we recognize those impulses that are common to all of us to one degree or another. And some of those can be awakened and some of those need to be developed. But I think we all have these desires we want to survive, we want to thrive, we want to seek truth, we want to sacrifice, we want to serve, we want to be part of something greater than ourselves. Like, these are very common issues, but they're put through the prism of these identities and this political matrix. And we say, well, where do I fit in? And if people feel like they don't fit in, they start to lash out. So I see this, and I see opportunity, because I see people trapped in ideas that are not helpful. I ask all the time, how are these ideas helping you practically? When you say, well, I have an offensive truth that the mainstream media won't talk about, and I'm going to say it in a very offensive way, or whatever the case may be, that kind of attitude, I always ask, how does that benefit you? There's a lot of stinky, there's a lot of gross stuff in the world. There's a lot of ugliness in the world. And you could spend all day reporting on crimes of various flavors and atrocities and psychopaths and pain. And so you could focus on that all day, but it wouldn't prevent it. It wouldn't really make the world better. You can complain from now to the end of time. And I fully recognize that in myself. I do that all the time. I complain about things, but the problem is when it gets pushed through this vector of ideology, what people are doing is they're expressing a deep psychological need to complain, to externalize their pain, but they have no self-realization. In fact, they believe it's some kind of activism when they're just complaining endlessly about their victim status and how the world has wronged them. this is not effective. This does not build people up. This does not bring people together in a constructive way. Now, people can commiserate. They can complain together about things. But that is a very flawed model of social organization. It is very unproductive and produces really hostile, acerbic, caustic personalities and groupings, and brings out the worst in people. So I see these people as human beings, and I want to help them, and I want them to change, and I've seen that change happen, and I want to encourage it, and I want to see it in myself as well. And I think we're all, in some ways or another, everyone would agree with the statement, we want to change for the better. I think everyone would pretty much agree with that. But it's the question in which we're authentically living at. Are we actually changing ourselves every day? Are we allowing our old ways to die so the new ways can be born? Are we willing to sacrifice? And what are we doing tangibly in reality, rather than just like complaining about what other people are doing, what the elites are doing? So on some level, there's a balance between, in the Bible, it talks about how the preachers would go into these towns and they would preach the gospel, and the people would reject them, and they'd have to just dust off their sandals and leave at a certain point. And these are supposed to be like the apostles and these great evangelists. And maybe you don't believe in any of that, but the general point is that at some point I can preach a message and I can state the same things over and over again. I feel like I'm making the same exact video a million times. But I guess for some people, you've got new viewers, you've got people where it didn't click, or they didn't listen, or it was on in the background, they're playing video games at the same time. They're not really sit down and listen. I was reading aloud to somebody the other day, and he was fidgeting, and he was stretching, he was getting up and moving around and cooking something, and I had to stop. Because I realized, gosh, the way that I'm reading and the way that I watch movies is so much more intense than other people. And it doesn't mean that I don't live a distracted life full of news articles and Twitter feeds and all that rest of that stuff. I'm just as bad as everybody else. But there's certain points of watching a movie or reading a book where you have to really give your full attention, or else, why bother, right? You're only going to get the most out of life if you fully put your attention into it. And people don't do that with my videos, and that's understandable because they're big stream of consciousness rambles, and I never know what is going to come out of my mouth. I have like some central point I want to make, or some roundabout conclusion I want to get to, and I don't know how I'm going to get there, but it's disordered, it's disorganized. Why would you pay attention to me? I don't know, honestly. I just started making these videos one day because I had an inkling, I had a hope, I had a dream, but it was all very subterranean and hidden under like just kind of a lackadaisical tendency of mine to ramble and go on and on. But somehow some people have liked it and some people have been affected by it. But I guess that's a long-winded way just to say that I'm going to make the same video a million times, but each time I make it, maybe it's a little bit better, maybe it's a little bit more effective, or maybe it's worse, but somehow the worst quality hit different. It just hit different. Who knows? So I'm making the same video again, and I'm always trying to get toward being explicit. But being explicit is painful. Like if I'm real with people and I actually tell them the situation, people reject me because they become defensive. They become reactive. They say, oh, you're accusing me. You're attacking me. You're arguing with me. So I have to push back. You push me, I push back. I understand that. And so I have to kind of lightly, gently guide people down a road where they're a little bit confused. They're a little bit disoriented, but at least they're not reacting. At least they're not fighting me. At least they're not angry. But I am ultimately trying to get to something very explicit and something very simple. We all kind of want the same things. And the question is, why can't we all just get together and get along and whatnot? And I really want that. And I have a deep resentment in my heart over this, which causes me a lot of pain and conflict. Like I think about it all the time is, why can't we all get together? Like I'm looking around the country at all these different places, right? And look, I know everyone's monetary means are different, but if my audience collectively got together and we put together all of our skills and all of our talents and all of our money, and not giving it to me, I'm not asking for Patreon donations, although, some people do that, and that's fine, that's their choice. But it's not about giving it to me. It's just about if we collectively, we could buy mansions, we could buy mansions and we could live in a mansion together. And what's the problem there is that, we don't get along. Even people who are very good friends, I've found through my lived experience, you have people who are best friends, who've been best friends for years, but when they live together, they get on each other's nerves because, you spend time together, you get familiar, but you also spend time together and you hit each other's boundaries and, people step on each other's toes. So that's an issue. Why can't we find a way to organize where we can respect each other's boundaries? I think that's a horse over there. Why can't we do that? Well, we have different personality types. We have different ways that we were raised. There's a lot of differences between us. And I'd like to think that they can all be overcome or that we can set those boundaries, but we kind of have to respect each other's boundaries on the one hand. We also have to be willing to stretch our boundaries and sacrifice something of ourselves. I said racism is for losers, but it's also for criminals. And being a criminal is not the same thing as being a sinner. Although in a theocratic system it is. Sometimes sinning against an unjust religion is the right thing to do. So, I can't tell you theologically one way or another how the reality is. But I guess I can tell you that it is the way it is. And you should act accordingly and decide in what context do you value things like truth and love and success. What does that mean for you? What is your passion? How do you pursue it? How do you express it? Do you put all your dirty laundry out there? Do you understand the way that you say something's a fact about the world, but do you understand the fact that facts themselves are always part of a nexus of ideology? Facts themselves, statistics, are always part of a narrative. There's no such thing as a pure object. An object is always mediated through perception, and the perception always exists as a field, a relative field of comparison. It never exists. Each perceiver exists in a certain space and time, in a certain position. There is no a-perspectival perceiver. In order to perceive, you must have perspective. In order to have perspective, you must have position. And position exists on axes. And those axes are not one-dimensional. Therefore, everything that we think, everything that we say, every word that we speak, every statistic and in fact and figure that we throw out there is all part of an embedded narrative, a mythology, a reality. And when we say one thing, we're not saying something else. We're excluding something. When we say one thing, we're being silent on something else. So we have to choose what we want to say and why we want to say it, and what is our goal? What is our goal with all of this stuff? Are we trying to attract a bunch of losers into a big Tamagotchi ball, or whatever the Japanese word, some big snowball of loserdom where we all just commiserate together? Is that the goal? No. I hope not. I think for some people, I guess it is, but it's not my goal. And I don't think, if we're honest about it, I don't think anyone would admit to that being their goal. So people are flexible, people are changeable, people have potential. And I think a certain degree of patience is warranted, and a certain degree of good faith is warranted to assume that people are not evil, and they want basically good things. Like, people want to have loving relationships, and as human beings, one of the ways that we achieve that is through family. And the family is, through time immemorial, really the backbone of the family is the community. People say it often the opposite way. The family is the backbone of the community. I think that's very backwards and wrong-headed and destructive. The backbone of the family is the community. The community informs, the community provides those axes and that context for the family. The community supports the family. And the idea of the family in opposition to community, or that first you need the family and then you build the community, this is a very bottom-up view of the world. The true sort of top-down thing is that you have a community, you have a society, and out of that society, families form. That is the collectivist top-down view as opposed to the individualist bottom-up view that I hold. So, what are the core tenets of belief and faith? What are the things you absolutely have to believe? And what are the things that you can't believe? And what are the things you can be agnostic about? And there are a lot of these issues that people come to me and they say, but isn't this the absolute truth? And how can you deny this? And don't you see that, let me red pill you on this? And I say, we have to zoom out. I mean, obviously we can get down into the weeds, although I find that in those weeds are a lot of lies and just assertions that are not coming from, this place of pure objective science that's claimed. So let's see if I get eaten by some dogs here. But, as much as we can spend our entire lives in the weeds, and that's what specialists do, and that's what fetishists do. They spend their entire life in the weeds. Do we ever zoom out and think of God? Do we ever zoom out and think of the totality of life and our highest purpose and order things from that and not from the bottom up and not from petty narratives and not from, psychological impulses in the specific, but do we ever zoom out to the biggest picture? And to me, the biggest picture is very simple. But it does exist within a context. It is not aperspectival. I'm not restarting civilization a bit. I'm assuming that I live in a society and I have to conduct myself accordingly. And there are certain things which are crimes and there are certain things which are sins. And I can rebel against that because I'm resentful, or I can choose to accept the law as it is. It's interesting also in the Bible, the way that the law is dealt with in the New Testament, that there sort of is a law. In Hinduism, this is more thought of in a karmic way, that every action has a consequence. Everything you do has a consequence. Everything you say has a consequence. Everything you think has a consequence. Every thought that you allow into your mind, that you accept, that you dwell upon, all of that has a real tangible consequence. It's not simply like, it's arbitrary or who knows what happens. I mean, you might be ignorant of the consequence, but there is a consequence. There's a consequence of our intentions. There's a consequence of our cynicism. There's a consequence of our despair. There's a consequence of apathy. There's a consequence of laziness. There's a consequence of distraction and procrastination. These things all have consequences. And if we're totally honest, we would say that the juice is not worth the squeeze there. The consequence is not worth. Am I going to get run over? Oh, that's funny. All the dogs are like, oh, the car's coming. Better stop barking. Let's see. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think there are amazing opportunities because we are in a time of decline. There's no other way to say it. I think if you're a rich person, you're living in a fantastic bull market. You know, rich people in this country in general have been monopolizing power and resources since the Second World War. And, you know, if you are rich, the system is working for you. But if you're not rich, then we are in a time of decline. And even though I think America and the American empire, its ideology, a lot of that is way more stable and virulent and powerful and resistant to change than people would like to think. At the same time, there's going to be a lot of struggle in the future, and it's not going to be nuclear war and civil war, anything dramatic or exciting, I guess, or stimulating. There's not going to be a hot physical war. That would be very sexy. But instead, we have this kind of cold economic decline, the decline of misery and opioids and porn addiction and video games and VR and Reddit and social media signaling and Instagram thoughts and OnlyFans, and like this is the slow decline. This is the neuroticism. This is how we come apart. This is why young people are lonelier than ever before. This is why people are depressed. This is why people are taking their own lives. This is why people have given up on relationships and children and self-sacrifice and loyalty and understanding and being willing to give to one another and trust one another. It is spiritual. And it is a spiritual war. It is a spiritual struggle. So how is that fought? How is that really addressed at the heart? You know, I talk to people who tell me they have all these ideological positions and all these ideological arguments are very important to them. And if I disagree, that means I'm a liar or I'm subversive or I'm the Antichrist or something. But, you know, these same people are so committed to these ideas and so committed to these positions. At the same time, they don't have their basic necessities, and none of these ideas or positions really lead them to those basic necessities. Like, we all want love, we all want community, we all want friendship, and the internet is not conducive to that. These arguments are not conducive to that. These politics are not conducive to that. There is no A to B. There is no A to Z. There is no way that complaining ritualistically about the elite puts you in a better position. That is not how revolutions work. Revolutions are driven by elites. They're not driven by complaints. People don't believe that because they're at heart Democrats who hate democracy. They're the most fervent believers in the peasant uprising, and yet they claim to be fascists. It is ridiculous, foolish, and pathetic. I see the symptoms of a disease. I see people frothing at the mouth. I see people with brain lesions. I see people drug addicted with scarred faces, throwing up. I see these things physically on the streets, but then I also see them metaphorically, metaphysically, spiritually. I guess the light has gone out. That's symbolic, right? We have to turn back. So I don't want to encourage that. I don't want to say, oh yeah, these symptoms are okay. In fact, they're good, because they're not. But I do believe there is healing. I do believe people can be brought to ill health, but we have to understand that these are symptoms of a disease. They are not the cure. When people are infected, when people are mutated, when people are unwell, when people are poisoned, they exhibit symptoms, and that's what ideology is. It's a symptom of a disease. but it's not the cure. The cure, getting to the root, actually pulling out that cancer, actually, you know, bringing health, bringing nutrition, bringing energy, bringing food, bringing spirit, bringing light, introducing all of that is going to decrease those symptoms. You have to see the symptoms as part of the problem and not the solution. And if we can get rid of that, we can get rid of that emphasis and say, like, you know what? I don't really care what you think about some faraway conflict. I don't really care what you think about some statistical problem. I don't care what you think about something. If you don't have control over it, I don't care what you think about it. But I do care how you treat people. And I do care if you're willing to sacrifice. And I do care if you're willing to love. And I do care if you actually know what that means, if you're willing to experience it. So that is what is non-negotiable. That is what is necessary. That is what's fundamental. That's what's religious. That's what will bind people together. Not ideology concerned with, resentments and scapegoating. So that's what I'm interested in. Anyone who doesn't understand that, I will try to teach them. I will try to talk with them. I will try to reason with them. I will try to be patient with them. But after a certain point, whether it's days, weeks, months, or years, if they continue to reject me and argue with me and do the contrary and try to lead people to the contrary and try to repeat the mistakes of the past 70 years, as I've detailed in my video on the dissident right, then at some point, those people are not just sick, diseased individuals, but they are infectious individuals. They are super spreaders of ideology. And in that sense, I do come to oppose them, and I do come to see them as pathogenic agents. I see them as, zombies, and I see them as, there was a term for people who were deliberately spreading AIDS, maliciously spreading AIDS, and that's how I look at these people. And I know that focusing on that and focusing on that negative has its limits. And that's part of why I'm making this video, is because I'm very frustrated. I'm frustrated with my own level of resentment because I think it's not productive. I don't think it's productive to hate people for telling lies, because they don't know what they're doing fundamentally. They think they're doing the right thing, and they're not. But I can't, at a certain level, people who are naive, people who are willing to talk, people who have an open mind, I want to be patient. I don't want to hate people for having the wrong opinions. But at a certain point, if somebody is kind of like a reprobate, it does frustrate me. And when people say, like, well, why can't you just get along with people? Why can't you just talk with people? It's like, these people need a wake-up call that I'm not powerful enough to give them. Like, they need a knock on the door at 4 a.m. in order to change their mind. Not that I encourage that or I'm part of that or anything, but I'm saying, like, it's that level of trauma. Trauma is an agent of change, and I'm not powerful enough to deliver that trauma with my mere words. They're kind of insulated from that because they get all this social high and social approval over the fact that they have a little ghettoized community, and that gives them their purpose in life. And I'm not going to be able to overcome that powerful incentive with a few, like, quirky arguments, right? So at some level, you kind of have to cut yourself off. So I don't want to create a community that allows this infection of ideology to seep in. I think we have to say no at some point. I think you have to sympathize with people who are trapped in it and try to help them out, but you can't include them as, like, yeah, you're my friend. You're my friend, because you surround yourself with sick and diseased and toxic people, and that's what you become. So there's a fine line, like, when you're a surgeon, when you're a doctor, and you're surrounded by the sick and diseased, like, how do you prevent yourself from yourself becoming sick and diseased? And just as that's true physically, it's also true mentally and spiritually. So it's a really tough problem, and it produces a lot of frustration, and sometimes I externalize that frustration onto people, and so I'm struggling with that, and I wanted to express it, to try to seek catharsis, to try to get it out there, because just mulling on it, and I see what it does to me, and I don't like it. I want to get it out there. I want to be honest about it, and I want people to understand where I come from. When I take a position and I really try to create friendships, and people give me flack for this, and they don't understand. They don't have sympathy for me. They don't have sympathy for my position. I want people to understand, and I know that making this video won't solve that problem, but it'll help me to try to put it into words, and maybe I'll continue to try to learn better ways to communicate, and not communicate from frustration of, oh, I can't believe you don't understand me. I guess you don't care about me or something, but to say, like, you don't understand me, but maybe I could help. Maybe I could help, because that's what I'm here to do. So, don't follow me on Twitter unless you want a video chat. That's the rule. At Jokkull, Jokkull. You can email me and check it. I haven't checked it yet, but maybe once every 6 months. DeepLeftJokkull with 1 L, Jokkull, at gmail.com. You can leave a comment in the comments. You can thumbs up the video. You can share it with your friends. Technically, you can follow me on Telegram at Jokkull, Jokkull, with 1 L. I don't post there, but I guess if something happened with Twitter, that would be how to reach me. But yeah, people can contact me. People can tell me their problems. I put that in a video, and someone was like, I'm going to tell you my problems now. And I'm like, great. Like, yeah, we all have issues. We all have problems. I have issues. I have problems. And if we can talk to each other and be honest about that, I think that's a step toward action, which is what is the goal. So thanks for listening. See you next time. Bye-bye.